Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, recording Monday morning because Keith is off work because it's a holiday. And so we're bright and early drinking coffee this morning instead of a favorite beverage. Well, this is a favorite beverage. It's just coming in the morning. And
this is our favorite morning beverage.
Yeah. And we're here to talk salary cap. And I'm sure we'll sneak in a few player conversations and may even dip into some player needs, roster evaluation, all that kind of stuff. But we'll see how the salary cap portion of the show goes. And good morning, Keith.
Good morning. So we are going through and looking at this, and one of the things that I found interesting when I just started this process is Seattle right now only has 49 players under contract for next year.
And if you don't count the the futures contracts, if you just look at players under contract per se, it's like 39.
Yeah, but the futures contracts count
Yes.
because they're under contract. Their contract hasn't started yet.
Correct.
But yeah, so we're looking at 49 players now. In the offseason, teams will carry 90. So they're going to add and add and add and add. And some of that will be through the draft and, free agency and undrafted free agents and everything. But
yeah,
teams like to carry 90 and they're at 49. So that's a long way to go.
And even with 49, I have to say, if you really take a look at the roster and you look at it and you take a peek at it, you kind of go, oh yeah, there's some spots where there's just not a lot of players or depth or any talent whatsoever. And you're just going, there's a lot of holes to fill. It's not quite as bad as it seems, obviously. And we're going to talk about salary cap today. So we do have some money sitting in our little piggy bank that we can go out and spend. Although right out of Pete Carroll's mouth, end of season conference said that, their primary objective, of course it is every year, is to retain a lot of those guys that are unrestricted, to have some of those guys back. So they're going to eat up a portion of that. But we'll talk about it and see what maybe makes sense, what doesn't. So, yeah, you want to just get started right at the top, Keith?
Yeah, well, of course, you've got to start. We can start with. Let's go ahead and start with how they are overall with their totals.
I think that's a good idea
because with that they are in good shape, right? So we're looking at the team being at 106 million on the active roster, including the futures contracts. And they are in great shape as far as the cap stuff because they don't have a ton of dead money, and they're sitting here with 44.2 million in cap space. They're sitting there with that's a lot of money to spend, especially when you think about last year they went in with pretty much nothing. So
let's back up just a hair and just say that the league has put in a estimated salary cap this season of 208 million roughly, and the Seahawks are sitting at like 167 overall. I thought. Now I don't know where you're getting your 104 number because I don't have access to that.
Oh, you know what? That number was just salaries. It didn't have any of the bonuses and stuff in it.
Okay. So we're at 167. I'm looking right at over the cap.
Yep.
We're at 167 total liabilities in 2022 currently signed contracts. That does not include, I don't believe, the futures. This is just under contract currently, not before league year starts. And only counting the top 51, but we don't even have 51, I don't believe, overall yet. And team cap space at $51,553,000. So Russell Wilson is an interesting number because he's got 37 million of cap space taken up. And if they were to trade him, and I don't think that they will, but let the rumors fly. They would save $11 million if they were to trade him. And that money could then be added to the cap and reallocated. Same with Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner's carrying a $20 million cap hit, $20,350,000 overall. They could save $16 million if they were to cut him or trade him. And so let's just have a conversation about those two guys, because they're carrying the primary savings if we were to move on from those players, and they have the most uncertainty, I think, of the players currently under contract.
Yeah. Well, I'm not convinced that there's uncertainty when it comes to Russell Wilson. To be completely honest, I think that everyone really wants there to be something to talk about, and so there's this,
of course, Keith.
There's this media push to keep his name out there as this option because it makes for great conversations on the radio, and it makes for articles that get clicks on the interweb. But you listen to Wilson, you listen to Pete Carroll.
Yes, the words they've actually spoken out of their own mouths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, okay, the only thing is that the one thing that came out, and I think it came out through his agent, was that Wilson he wants to stay in Seattle, but he is exploring his options or something like that. Yes. But that was from his agent. Again, as we found out last year, things that come from Wilson's agent aren't always what Wilson, is thinking and wants, but they're all done because there's a reason, right? There's not necessarily the honesty, like, oh, he's exploring options. He has.
I think they're pining now. To me, I think that they think they might be in a decent position to push for an extension. Yeah. To A, give Russell Wilson more money. B, show the team and show the fans that they're all in on Seattle. So it does serve two purposes. However, Seattle doesn't necessarily need to do that. They're in really no position, no pressure to add years onto the contract now. In fact, may want that flexibility just in case things do go south. They do have him under contract for 2 years. They do have 2 franchise tags they could apply. So they have team control for 4 years. Okay. So that's not an insignificant fact that really throws a wrench into this idea that Russell Wilson is going to explore his options and he's going to want to play somewhere else. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. Now, he could force a trade, and he's really concerned about his legacy, Keith. If he were to force his way out of this city and into another situation, that would be a really bad look, I think, overall for him and his legacy, if that's really important. And so I don't see anything happening just from a financial and contractual obligation standpoint.
Well, and then you look at other situations and how these have unfolded, because quarterbacks are unique compared to other players.
Absolutely.
Aaron Rodgers couldn't force his way out of Green Bay. He tried really, really hard. And the team essentially said no. And he's there, and actually they're probably the favorites to come out of the NFC.
Yeah, that is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and right. So and the thing is, people are still talking about him as a potential, not free agent, but trade acquisition for other teams, even though they may be a Super Bowl team. Like, how weird would that be? But then what are some of the other situations where teams have managed, or where players have managed to force their way out? You can think of
usually just malcontent type guys.
Well,
guys that are,
it's like Carson Palmer. I was just thinking, but just in terms of quarterback, Carson Palmer had to retire for half a year, and then wait for a desperate Raiders team to lose their quarterback and offer a pile of picks to Cincinnati to get him, for him to come back and rejoin the league. But he had to retire for half a year.
Yeah.
And
these things are real. The only thing that you could make an argument for if he were to want to force something and hold out and just make it miserable for the Seahawks, is just protecting the culture, protecting the franchise. You want to do the best thing. If it's going to be so unpleasant for everyone that you just get to the point where you're better off taking the picks, taking the draft capital that you can get for them, and getting that out of your system, then that's the case. But man, a lot needs to happen before that truly is what's going to go down.
And the Green Bay situation this year, it indicates that just having a quarterback that's unhappy and maybe wants out, if the team's committed and whatnot, it doesn't have to, really hurt the team overall. Like it doesn't.
Because there's still incentives for Russell Wilson to play at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
So and I'll just say this, there's just going to be a ton of chatter, a ton of talk. You mentioned the exploring the options comment. I think overall our position on this show is just going to be, we're going to assume that Russell Wilson's back on this team, and we're going to ignore pretty much all the other stuff, because if we talk about this incessantly over and over again every show, it's just going to get tiring for us, tiring for you. Let's just wait and see, and listen to Pete Carroll, listen to John Schneider, listen to Russell Wilson himself. If it comes from them, I'm going to be listening. If it's coming from all the punditry out there, you just got to take it with a grain of salt and just assume that it's probably not completely accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just leave it there. All right, Bobby Wagner, Keith. I think this is
a different discussion.
Yeah, this is probably the most difficult choice that this team is going to have to make. It wouldn't surprise me if they've already kind of made this choice, but boy, talk about a difficult choice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they were looking at a situation where, and they were in this position a year ago where you're looking at a middle linebacker at $17 million of cap space. That's crazy. But
they easily committed to that. I mean, they just came out and said, we're on the Bobby Wagner train and we're not ready to get off yet.
Yep. And they just committed to it and rolled with it. And I always expected them to do something and rework that deal, because it is a lot of cap space for a middle linebacker, regardless of the middle linebacker. Now we're talking about a first ballot Hall of Famer, a 6-time All-Pro guy that's going to end up not leading the league in tackles this year, but only because he missed 2 games at the end of the year.
But the tandem of Brooks and Wagner, they had like 300 and some odd tackles, was the most tackles by a tandem on a team since the year 2000. Yeah. And I don't know what preceded that, but that's crazy.
Yeah, I was looking at the Seahawk records. And so Bobby Wagner, before he got hurt, with 2 games left, set the record for most tackles in a season for the Seahawks. And so you looked at the list, and it's Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he is, and he's not playing in the middle. So
Jordan Brooks does make this situation a little bit more interesting, because they have a ready-made player there that can already step up and be a leader in that position and kind of just go forward. Now, everyone, thinks of Brooks as a Seahawk playing on the outside, but he was a really decent middle linebacker in college.
Well, true. He was a middle linebacker in college, but he was also an outside linebacker in college before that final year.
His junior year, yeah, right.
Yeah, so he can, and his tape as a middle linebacker was good, except for when he was in coverage, and then it wasn't great. But his tape when he was an outside linebacker in coverage in college was good, and that was one of those points that everyone who wanted to bash him seemed to miss. And then when you go look at this year, everyone's like, oh, he's so bad at coverage, and I'm like, how do you actually watch games? I see him 35
he has a few misses, but come on, he's really been awesome.
You see him 35 yards downfield covering a receiver, and he's right there. And you don't see that with most linebackers. And I mean, yeah, he has a few misses, but only when he's a linebacker covering a receiver. And for the most part, that is a situation that quarterbacks want to eat, right?
Well, and that's a scheme situation we can have a conversation about too. I mean, does he belong 35 yards down the field in coverage? But what I'm saying though is that it does present a fairly unique situation to the Seahawks. Seattle, given Bobby Wagner still on the top of his game, although albeit 34, Keith. He's probably in a window of a 2 or 3 year window where you're going to start to see diminishing returns with Bobby Wagner. I think you're seeing that a little bit. He plays middle linebacker and he's making a ton of tackles, but you're seeing the depth of those tackles, I think, increase. He's not fighting through all that contact up at the line of scrimmage as much as he used to. But I will say he's still premier, right? So you could get, if you wanted to trade Bobby, I'm just going to speculate just for a minute. If you wanted to trade Bobby Wagner, you may have a team in the second round that would be willing to give up a second round pick for Bobby Wagner because he brings so much to your team, not only the physical gifts on the field, but he's going to bring something to your locker room that you may not have and covet, and he would bring that in spades. So what are your thoughts about Bobby Wagner potentially leaving the Seahawks this year, Keith?
It's a definite possibility. One thing, you said 34, he's going to be 32 for next season. So
that's not as bad as I thought it was.
Not quite as old as you were thinking. So, and with that, you look at the play, he's continuing to just make tackle after tackle, and he does all these things. But there was a point where he was the fastest middle linebacker in the game for a number of years, and he is nowhere close anymore. I think that knee that he has, he gets that injection in and has to miss a week in preseason every year, is starting to slow him down, and he's just older. That's a lot of hits and a lot of tackles.
And
there is some natural wear and tear that happens because of all of that. And so with him, he isn't the guy with all the physical gifts he once was, but he's still really, really smart and a very sure tackler and does a lot of things. I mean, there's a reason why he's setting franchise records in tackles at this age. The idea that he's not getting up to the line of scrimmage and making those tackles, for no gain or 1 yard, and instead making them 2 or 3, 4 yards downfield, that's accurate. It is. Some of that has to do with what's in front of him and whether or not they are, keeping the line or keeping the guards and center off of him from pulling. I've seen him fight through a lot more blocks this year than we're used to. And so that's part of it. But then part of it also is just a speed issue. He just isn't getting there as quickly. It takes him, he's a step or two behind. And
so let me ask you this, Keith. For me, I think it's way more likely that he gets restructured. And what I mean by that is essentially extended. So I would add 2 years onto his current deal, give him a 3-year overall, but that last year's somewhat, you can get out of jail with it if things kind of go south, if he does regress. But I would get his cap number down from, say, 20 million this year to close to 12 or 13, pick up an additional $7 million, push some of that down the road a little bit, and retain Bobby Wagner on this team. I think he just brings so much value, and value that you just can't put your finger on as well, just off the field stuff, character, all of that. It's just a really big thing on this team, and we don't have a lot of it. And I think there would be a big hole if he were to go away. He's going to go away at some point, but I think if the band's back together this year, Pete Carroll, John Schneider are back, you got Russell Wilson, you're still in win now mode. You kind of build that roster to kind of go for it again in 2022. And Bobby Wagner, it seems to me, would be a big, huge part of that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're right on that. I think extending him for 1 year and then a voidable year at the, for a third year, just to get his cap number down. I think the other thing is you're looking at his overall money that's left on this deal is, for him, his take home is, 16.6 million. Now he's got a $20 million cap hit. Some of that is his signing bonus that's been prorated from when he signed this contract.
Correct.
But his take home is, 16.6. I don't know if he's going to get that anywhere. If the Seahawks cut him, he's going to sign a much lower deal, and he knows that. And so for him, having some stability, knowing that he's going to have a spot on a roster a year from now, 2 years from now, is going to be worth it to him because his total money is going to would go up. And so, because if he goes into this year, plays this contract out, he makes $16.6 million this year, but what he loses is any stability, any guaranteed money going forward. And so if the team were to give him, let's say what you were saying, one more deal, an avoidable year, and you guarantee his salary for 2022 and part of it for 2023, and you make that guaranteed salary more than the 16.6 that he's going to make in 2022, I think he would go for it. So you make it. So you
and all the time, the whole time the cap is going up for the Seahawks. So his percentage overall is going down as his contract is being paid out.
Yeah, and so you take that 16.6, you spread it out over 2 years, add a little bit more to it, make it $10 million per year, so he gets $20 million of total money instead of 16.6. But it's over 2 years. You get his cap number down under control, and then you keep your leader, your captain, your one of the best players of your franchise history on the roster instead of pushing
I would be okay even if that number was 14. I don't know that he would go clear down to 10. I think that realistically, and the way that the Seahawks are known to take care of their players, especially a player like Bobby Wagner, it's more likely that they
No, I wasn't talking cap number. I was talking about real money. His cap number is still going to be
even real money. What I'm saying
17.
is even real money. If he's going to take 16 this year, you have to ask yourself, when he's his own agent, when he signed his contract, did he think that he would make this 16.35 in 2022? And the answer is probably 50-50, 30-70 no. Because they're very, very realistic in the NFL most of the time. And he understands this number and understands it's way out of whack as far as middle linebackers in the NFL and all that kind of stuff. So he would likely, I agree with you. I think that, I think he's back, honestly. And I think it's reworked into the point where his cap number in 2022 is probably closer to 13 or 14, I would think.
Yeah. And to get it down there, because he's also got that roster bonus on there, and which counts against the cap and that kind of stuff. But to get it down into that range, his salary is going to have to drop.
Yeah, but I still think he can take. I still think he can take between $14 and $16 million home in 2022 guaranteed.
That's a lot. That's shifting a lot of that salary into bonus.
Yes, correct.
Which kicks it down, which just means it's more next year.
And if you throw the void year in 2024,
it spreads it out another year.
If he's got like a $4 million dead cap hit in 2024 and he's not on the roster anymore, that's just the nature of business in the NFL. All right. So we've spent a lot of time on two guys. Let's kind of go through the rest of the cap. So we have $51 million. Dwayne Brown is a big issue. He's not under contract, but he has a dead cap figure of 3.5. You take a look at Gerald Everett's got a dead cap number at $2 million, but he's not under contract. Quandre Diggs, 2.5 million dead cap number. So there is some dead cap. You'd mentioned it earlier at the top of the show. Don't have a lot. We have more than we usually do because of the nature of last year where we just had some real cap issues, but we still needed to fill out the quality roster. So they went ahead and pushed some money out.
And every team did, because the salary cap went down for the first time ever. And so when that happens, the teams wanted to stay competitive. They did. They added a lot of these void years, which the Seahawks have avoided in past years. And so, but they had to do it. In order to get guys on the roster, you had to have their cap numbers be lower than you typically would. And so they pushed money out. So they have some, but then you look around the league at the dead money for next year, and the Seahawks are in great shape. That's what I meant by that, is you compare it to other teams. Maybe compared to past years for Seattle, it's a little higher, but compared to other teams, it's a lot lower. They did a lot fewer of that void year stuff than quite a bit of teams, especially teams that you think of as, perennial contenders like New Orleans and Green Bay, they're in much worse shape as far as dead money goes.
All right. So which direction do you want to go with this? Because we can keep talking about this in general, but we can kind of, if you wanted to, we could spend some time talking about, players and kind of where we're at. Where do you, let me ask you this question before we go any further. Out of that 51 million, 52 million that we have, what is the realistic usable cap space that we have to go out and look at free agents, whether they're retaining our own or outside the organization?
Typically you take just under 10 million of that and you put it in your back pocket, because you have to pay your draft picks. You have to have the ability to sign people mid-season when someone gets hurt. And you also have to pay your practice squad. So, and these are things that you don't tend to think about. So I would say you take that about $10 million and you put it in your back pocket and you're left with 41 in order to retain it and acquire. But I think what's missing in that is you have to go through and you got to look at there's other money here, right? You just go down the team's list. What are you going to do with Carlos Dunlap, who was a complete
no show in the first half of the season and then came on like gangbusters? It was kind of crazy.
Exactly. And so like what happened? What do you
But
do
his
with
numbers
him?
his numbers not huge for that position though. Like your lead edge rusher on a defense at $6.5 million is a pretty good number.
True. Okay, then what about Jamal Adams? Do you want to have that conversation?
Wow.
Because
that's so hard, because he's definitely not going anywhere. I mean, he has a dead cap hit of like $28 million. You would be underwater with him, almost $20 million, just because of all the bonus monies out there.
Yeah, I've got it. His dead cap at 16 for next year. Is that not what you have? Over the cap has his dead money at $28,440,000 in if he was cut pre-June 1st. And no, I mean the saving there is no, it's negative $19 million in savings. I mean it's just he's uncuttable. So what would you do there? He's got all the leverage in that case, and so you just kind of have to ride that a little bit unless you structure him or trade him. Yeah, if you trade him pre-June 1st, I think that's what I had. It's ugly, but if you trade him post June 1st, you end up with about $2 million in savings, a big dead hit, cap hit. Well, in order to do that though, you've paid him this year already, right? So you've paid him. That's why. That's why I was saying if you trade him. Right. Yes. You paid him the big bonus. Yeah. But you paid him the big bonus. Right. But you just swallow that as a franchise, but it doesn't count so poorly against your overall cap. And so do you make that choice? I mean, here's my feeling on Jamal Adams. I think he's getting a real bad rap overall by fans in a critical way. And I don't think that our master defensive coordinator, Ken Norton Jr., has really put him in the best position to maximize his talent and to be successful, at least not in a full year. He's done it in bits and pieces. I think a lot of it was squandered at the beginning of the year. He was just kind of misused down the field a lot as the second free safety, in a cover 2 situation. He's just not that player. And so up at the line of scrimmage is where Jamal Adams goes. Now, with that said, he's not an up at the line of scrimmage body type. So he's got this body that's like 6 foot and 210 pounds, but he plays with such reckless abandon, Keith, that he's had surgery now 2 years in a row. His season's ended. He's missed, a lot of chunks of time because of those injuries. And I don't see that slowing down at all for Jamal Adams. In fact, I can see it potentially forcing him out of the league at some point because he's just not going to be physically able to do the job. And he seems to be only able to play one way, which is just
100%, which I don't fault
Which
him
you
for.
want. Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And so to me, Jamal Adams, continues to give you kind of diminishing returns over time. Maybe not the length of this contract, but I think eventually. I just don't know. I mean, if we were happen to move on from a guy like Ken Norton Jr. and brought in a defensive coordinator that was better suited overall for the talent that we have as a team and still able to execute Pete Carroll's defense, Jamal Adams might be a better fit overall, but it's hard for me. I think everyone, especially like our free safety, Keith, Quandre Diggs, if you take a look at the way that the free safety is used on Seattle's defense, he really depends on everyone being in their positions correctly and so forth. And I think Jamal Adams is just kind of a ad hoc player. He just kind of plays his stuff, but I think Pete has gotten into his ear and said, hey, you know what? If you see something, just go for it. We want playmakers. We want guys to go out and make plays. Use your instincts. So I think Jamal plays out of the scheme more than other players on the defense, which hurts Quandre Diggs the most. And our outside corners suffer from that as well because Quandre Diggs is a step late covering, and our outside corners seem to be on an island more when Jamal Adams is kind of all over the place. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what's wrong with our defense, especially at the beginning of the year. But I think Jamal Adams is part of that equation, and I just don't know exactly how to fix it, Keith.
Well, and I don't think it's Jamal Adams that's part of that equation. I think it's how he's used. I mean, he is a
well, that's kind of what I mean.
He is a unique talent. He is one of those tilt the field kind of guys, as Pete Carroll puts it.
Yes.
He's a guy who's been an All-Pro. He holds the NFL record for sacks by a defensive back, despite missing a bunch of games that year. I mean, this is a physical specimen that can really play.
And you didn't use him at all that way this year. Crazy.
And he blitzed like almost never. He had no sacks.
No sacks, no pressures, no hits.
It just wasn't used in that way. Instead, for the first half of the season, they had him 25 yards off the line of scrimmage. And that's not what he does well. And to me, that's entirely a scheme thing. I don't share your opinion about him being an ad hoc player that doesn't, do his responsibility. Pete Carroll would never stand for that. He has taken guys that have, high pedigree and benched them, cut them because they refused to actually do their job. And
that is true. I mean, I'll give you that.
And when I watch, I see what they do is they have a responsibility for him that might be unique to him because it's not what you'd see another strong safety do. He's not another strong safety. He's a unique guy. But I think everyone around him knows what he's supposed to be doing. The problem is that I think we saw at the beginning of the year certain cornerbacks that didn't trust him. In that, even though because he's not going to be where he would normally be, he's not going to be there where a normal strong safety would be. They've got him doing something else. They were like bailing on their coverage and trying to stay back and things like that. Whereas, when we got different corners in there, it suddenly worked a lot better because they just did their job instead of trying to account for where they think a free safety should be. And so I don't know. I think it worked. I didn't like the way they used him off the line of scrimmage. They needed to have him up there, have him attacking.
Playing in a traditional strong safety role, I think, is the best role for Jamal Adams. I really do. Or a strong side linebacker role. He doesn't have the body for a strong side linebacker, but that's kind of the way you use him in a sense. If he's not having to set an edge, I think he's fine. If you're having him rush from the strong side linebacker position occasionally, anything close to the line of scrimmage, that way he can drop back into coverage and so forth. I mean, I think you line him up as a strong safety, you line him up as a strong side linebacker, you line him up, anywhere in that, maybe a nickel at times. And that's the best use for Jamal. But I agree that second free safety, but hanging back off the line of scrimmage is probably not it. So what do you think about his contract? What do you think about what they do going forward?
Well, I look at his contract, and you're right. It's not really tradable this year. Certainly not cuttable. I wouldn't do that because you're giving up on a player and you're not getting much in return as far as cap money that you could go spend. But tradable, if you're going to go and say, okay, we are going to give up on him. We're only going to get $2 million in cap money, but we at least get these draft picks, right? We get a second, a fifth, or whatever it ends up being. There's some of that, but you have to wait in order to do it. You have to wait until after June 1st. So that means there's no benefit to doing it before the draft. You'd be looking at, well, we're going to do this for next year's draft picks. So you're going to not have the player this year. So you can get draft picks a year.
If you're going to have this conversation, that you have this conversation this time next year.
Yeah. You're going to get him healthy this offseason after his surgery.
Absolutely. And you're going to integrate him the best you can into your defense.
Yeah, and then you're going to have it then. Because of the way his contract is, he's got the the number 5 cap hit on the team currently. And this year, the Six didn't get much out of him, considering that cap number.
So one other player that I wanted to have a conversation with you about in this show, and then we can do team needs and roster evaluations in another episode. Mm-hmm. But the last one I really wanted to talk to you about this year would be DK Metcalf. He obviously doesn't have a cap number this year to worry about, but he's a player that you're going to extend.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
This would be the time between now and, say, the first day of training camp, or even the first play of the regular season, would be the time that you would want to extend DK Metcalf. I'm just curious as to your thoughts about that overall, how this kind of plays out.
I think they absolutely should, and should extend him and give him a boatload of money and make it work.
All right.
Right. You look around the league and you go, okay,
and he had a down year. He had a down year this year, right, Keith? He still had nearly 1,000 yards, 85 receptions or whatever. And you think you could have, with the 3 or 4 games that Russell was off, you could even say 5, you could have added to that, and he would have had a similar season he had the year before in the Pro Bowl and all that kind of stuff. So while there might be some argument out there as to the extension and the size of the contract that he's going to receive, I think you have to look at the entire body of work, not just necessarily this year. And the offense struggled in general. My only concern with DK Metcalf is just not getting him the ball enough. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to pay that guy $20 million a year, which is kind of where I think he's probably going to be, you better darn well kind of force the ball, not necessarily force the ball, but look at what the Rams do with Cooper Kupp. I mean, they just make sure that he gets 10 opportunities to catch the ball a game, no matter what.
Yeah, and I think they're going to have to do more to scheme him touches, because they did that a little bit. They would throw a couple of those quick, almost wide receiver screens to him just to get the ball in his hands. They started doing that near the end of the year after his touches was just extremely low. But the other thing that the Rams do with Cooper Kupp is they move him around. They put him in different places. They scheme him open, coming from stacks.
Yes, they scheme him open.
And that kind of stuff.
That's the key right there.
And so they scheme the ball into his hands in a way that the Seahawks didn't do this year. They didn't move DK Metcalf around. He didn't line up in the slot hardly at all. They didn't stack, other wide receivers that are with him in order to get him a clean release and things like that. And so they would just stick him out there wide, on one side and tell him to go. And when teams are double teaming him on almost every play, which they are, because they're rolling a safety his way, he's got the corner and the safety on him on almost every play. It's going to be harder to get him the ball. And so they need to do some other things. And they didn't this year. And I found that to be a bit frustrating. And so you were gonna talk about where he might be contractually if they do extend him before I interrupted you. Sorry. Which is what you do. No. So
I try not to.
So you look around the league and you go, okay, so where does he work as far as, and we can just do average a year, total money, and it ends up depending on how many years the contract is. So saying, Amari Cooper got 100 million.
Wow.
But only 40 of it was guaranteed. It's $20 million a year. That's a potential place to look. Michael Thomas is roughly the same number at 19.25. Tyreek Hill's at 18. There's a couple of ones that are crazy above that. DeAndre Hopkins is currently sitting at 27 and a quarter, but I don't think he makes that going forward. Julio Jones at 22. That was more of a legacy signing because of what he'd done in the past.
Correct.
And so,
but a second contract for a player of DK Metcalf's stature, I think, is probably close to 20. That's just a gut feel to me.
Yeah, but just looking at Tyreek Hill, Michael Thomas, and Amari Cooper, those are the types of players that you compare that to. Also, you look at the fact that Tyler Lockett is at 17.25.
Yes.
For his there, so he's going to make more. He's going to make more than Lockett, and he's going to make less than Julio Jones, which is at 22. So that gives you the range of 17 and a half to 22.
So we have the money this year, but that would take up a significant chunk. So how does the Seahawks make sure that they retain DK Metcalf and still have money to spend on other players?
It doesn't have to take up a significant chunk, because when you hear the 20 million, that doesn't mean his cap number is going to be 20 million in this year. You're going to.
So why don't you explain that for folks that don't follow the cap very much?
Okay, so the cap number works in a couple of different ways. So their salary is part of their cap number for that year, and then whatever signing bonus they get, that number gets prorated over the life of the contract. And so what that means is, so if you sign a 5-year deal, let's say it's got a $10 million signing bonus, then each year that signing bonus counts for $2 million per season.
And that player gets that up front.
They get it up front, but then they get the team gets the cap relief by spreading it out. And then what you do is you say, okay, what's their take home per year, right? And so in year 1, their take home is almost all of that bonus. So let's give it to you now, and your salary is going to be tiny, but who cares? You've already gotten paid for this year, and then next year your salary goes up. So you're never playing for a tiny amount, but in the first year it's all signing bonus, so it spreads it out. And so you can take a guy like DK Metcalf. Let's say they give him that 5-year, $100 million contract, so it's 20 million per year. If you give him, let's say, 15 million of that up front, right? That means, okay, that first year he's going to get 15 million in signing bonus and another 5 million in salary. Well, his overall cap number for this first year is going to be 8 million, 5 million from his salary and 3 million from that cap hit spreading out. So he's going to have a very manageable cap hit in this first year, and then you spread it out. Well, but that means his cap number goes up in future years. True, but
so the salary cap.
The salary cap as a whole goes up in future years, and next year, as there were these new TV contracts and streaming contracts are starting to kick in. There's a lot more money coming into the NFL, and that salary cap's going to skyrocket. So, you got to get through a year, and then you let it play out. I think you can sign him. I think you can get him for in a way that's not going to hurt the team as far as its salary cap. And honestly, you're not contending without weapons for Russell Wilson, and he's arguably the most talented weapon you've had in your franchise since probably Joey Galloway. So, yeah,
not taking anything away from Tyler Lockett. They're just two different players.
Yeah, they are, and I'm just Tyler Lockett is phenomenal and deserving of being, what is it, the 10th highest paid receiver in the league. And even though a lot of people outside of Seattle will be like, wow, they're overpaying him. No, they're not. They really aren't. But Tyler Lockett is not the physical specimen that DK Metcalf is. Tyler Lockett's not the guy that will keep defensive coordinators up at night the way DK Metcalf is. So you pay that kid and you keep him on your roster.
All right. So let's wrap this show up. So we've kind of gone through the salary cap. We spent a lot of time on 3 players overall, but you got a real good idea, right? I mean, that's kind of the gist of the cap. It's like you really focus on the players that have meaningful impact on that cap, and then everyone else just kind of falls into line. So when we go through the roster and we talk about the offensive needs and defensive needs, we'll get a little bit more into the cap and the roster and how it all works and what we need and how it all fits together. And we'll start with the offense later this week, and then we'll get to the defense. Anything else, Keith? And we'll get out of here.
No, let's just get out of here. This has been a long show. I get the salary cap is not always the most fun topic to get into, but I think it's great for you and I to make sure that we've researched where they're at this year really well as we go into the offseason. It really does set the table for where we're going. So thank you for bearing with us, everyone.
Yeah. I like the show because I'm a kind of a wonkish guy. I like the details. I like to know how it all fits together. It's kind of like a puzzle. I really respect the guys that on the team that are part of the salary cap management around John Schneider and company. I think they do a great job overall. I mean, one of the most well-managed salary cap teams in the NFL. You know, they just are.
John Snyder does a good job with that, but you're right. The guy who does the work, the salary cap expert, and the guy that negotiates a lot of the salaries is Michael Thomas. Within the organization, and he has been great. It used to be John is before he left to be the Jets general manager, and you don't let the cap guy make personnel decisions. That was a mistake by them. But he did a fantastic job, and when he left, I was worried. Thomas came in and has filled in and done a great job as well. So
yeah, and we rank 7th overall in the NFL this year in salary cap availability. So it's going to be a fun year to spend a little bit of money. So all right, follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. Seahawksplaybook.com is all the stuff. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube, and make sure you subscribe, share with your friends, all that good stuff. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.